Welcome to Cultivate. Today we have a very interesting guest, Chris Tuck. He's actually a financial advisor for SJK Wealth Management. And the reason we're having Chris on today is because I get a lot of inquiries about stocks, about cannabis stocks, and giving direction. And of course, I'm definitely not the person to give direction. But I wanted to have somebody very knowledgeable in the situation, but also outside of cannabis, so he can talk about the mechanics and help those of you that are interested in getting into some stocks. So welcome, Chris. Thanks so much for taking the time to be on.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm looking forward to the talk. I know we talked a little bit, before this, and excited to talk to your audience.
Yes, thank you so much for reaching out to Cannabis Tech. I think this was perfect timing with all the stock mania going on in Canada and also here in the United States. So tell us a little bit of background
Sure.
for yourself.
Sure. So I'm an independent LPL advisor. Our practice name is SJK Wealth Management, like you said. So I help individual clients try to pursue their financial goals. So we build custom portfolios here at the practice. We don't only invest in the cannabis space. In fact, we only do that for some clients that can tolerate that type of risk. But we build portfolios to help clients pursue their financial goals. We're a family practice, so I work with my father-in-law and my wife, and we have some employees here as well. Again, we're looking to help clients kind of figure all this out. We've got a lot of requests from clients. Should they be investing in this space? There's a lot of hype there right now. I get that call probably at least once a day.
Wow.
And we have to align that, really outline the risk of that space. There's definitely a lot of opportunity. We need to talk about is the risk appropriate for the client? Sometimes I'll get a 70-year-old retiree asking if they could be investing their money in the cannabis space.
Right.
And, the question is, do they really need to? So
right.
You get a lot of interesting questions here, that's for sure.
So you said risk. You consider cannabis still risky? Is that because it's federally illegal,
Sure.
penny stocks?
Yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, so there's not a lot of cannabis-related stocks that trade on the big exchanges. So we think about the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, things like that. Most of the area is still in penny stocks, like you said. And there's not a lot of regulation over that space. So we've seen, you and I have talked about some shell companies and things like that. There's just a lot of scams still going out there. But when we talk about risk, there's risk just investing in any stock. I mean, stocks have risk. Any investment carries some type of risk. But I'd say the cannabis area in particular, just because of the small amount of companies that are available on large exchanges, that creates risk because you get a lot of people that plow into a very small amount of names. And that can really drive prices up artificially. So you got to be very careful investing in that space.
We're definitely seeing that for sure. And for those of you out there that don't know this, I actually took my company, did a reverse merger, and he can talk about what a reverse merger is. But unfortunately, it was on the penny stocks, and the company was, let's just say, not legit, unfortunately, and I did in fact lose that company. The important thing about it is the stock is still trading today because nobody does due diligence. And again, this is what the show is about. Some simple steps for you to, just look up a website, email. So just wanted to give that background, and you can look it up yourself, CANL. So with that said, I came on early, and like you said, there's barely any regulation anyway in the penny stocks, let alone in the cannabis penny stocks. So let's talk about some of those dangers and kind of, how you handle those.
So I think there's a couple key principles that people should think about when they're looking at this space. One, that this is investing, and it's not a get rich quick scheme, right? So there's definitely been millionaires, multimillionaires made in the cannabis sector. However, those are, tend to be people that have very acute knowledge of that space. To just pick an individual stock and expect that, you're going to be a millionaire overnight, that's not really investing, that's gambling. I think people need to exercise caution. If they're getting into this space expecting that, they should also expect the other side of that, which is losing everything. So I would not be investing in this space with more than you're willing to lose. And I think that's an important way to be approaching this sector, at least at this point, until things become a little bit more, obviously in the US, some more federal regulation. We obviously got some news with the midterms the other day, a few other states opening up access, but there's still a long way from federal regulation, maybe closer with Jeff Sessions being fired now. But
let's cross our fingers.
I think people just still need to exercise caution and do due diligence. And like you said, it can be as easy as, does this company have a website? I mean, that's the most basic, investing research that you can really do. And obviously you can go a lot deeper than that. But one of the easiest ways to do it is to look at if a stock is trading on a major exchange, like the New York Stock Exchange, like the NASDAQ, even the Toronto Stock Exchange, if you have access to that, there is a vetting process that those companies have to go through. But those exchanges make sure that they have the right reporting in place for their financials. That doesn't mean you can't lose, right? So just because it's on an exchange doesn't mean the stock price can't go down. But it does ensure a little bit more regulation and due diligence at a corporate level. So I think that's, if you're interested in getting invested in the space, starting there is probably a good idea.
I would also say that doing due diligence is, yes, going to the website and actually looking at the team.
Yeah.
Do they have people on the team that are from cannabis? Right. Because this is a very hard industry to navigate, and those outside of it do not understand it. And there's still that attitude, which is fading quickly, of, oh, it's a bunch of stoners. And that's simply not true anymore, as you have seen just some huge money getting into this industry now. But looking at the team, and then doing some due diligence on the team members to see if they have been involved in any, scandals through their licenses or some other companies. That's
some smart advice. And you usually can, if someone's credible, you can usually find their background on something like Bloomberg or something like that. Just Googling their name and seeing what their background is, seeing how long they've been in the industry. Have they had success if they've come from another company? Did that company disappear, or did it get acquired? Things like that.
Or rebranded and changed names. That's a huge one. Well, let's talk a little bit about what you call cannabis mania.
Sure.
Starting earlier this year, especially with Canada. Yeah. We saw some huge swings.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Well, I think that it's important to think about these mania events. So last year there was a crypto mania where you had all of the digital currencies just doubling and tripling in value almost seemingly overnight. You go back further, there was a .com mania right in the 90s and the 2000s. These are all bubbles that burst. But that doesn't mean it's over, right? So I think people need to be cautious of getting into the excitement of the bubble. And I think we did start to see that form in cannabis in the beginning of 2018. It was obvious. There was certain stocks that were up over 200% in a very short period. A lot of those have dropped nearly 50% since those like October highs. And actually it timed pretty closely with the legalization in Canada. So we all knew it was coming in October, and kind of up until that, we call it in the business, buy the rumor, sell the.
Oops.
Are you still there?
Yeah. So let's go to the top of by the rumor. That's
Right.
where you were right. So let's back up to there. Yeah. When Canada went legal.
Yeah. So yeah, we actually saw a lot of the mania happening up through legalization in Canada, which we all knew was going to be in October. And we, in the business, we call that buy the rumor, sell the news. So the rumor was that there was going to be legalization in Canada, and then the news actually happened on the day, and a lot of those stocks dropped precipitously after that. So, you know, I think realizing when you're in a bubble is sometimes hard, but when there's excitement, when everyone around you is talking about, you know, investing in the space, that's when maybe you should exercise some caution. And then the opposite, when people aren't talking about it or it starts to get really negative, that's when you should start to be taking the other side of that. So a lot of those, like I said, some of those stocks were up over 200% in 2018 and have lost nearly half of their value from those highs. That doesn't mean they can't go down further, but looking for when those bubble burst. And you go back to the dot-com bubble. That bubble burst, there were certainly opportunities that presented themselves after all of that, and just tech companies that came out of that are just behemoths this day.
Right.
But back then, you know, if you bought them back at the highs of that bubble, you might still be underwater even today. So, you know, be cautious and don't just jump in. It's that fear of missing out that can be really dangerous, really, really dangerous.
Absolutely. And we use that technique in sales all the time.
Yes.
Create urgency, right?
Exactly.
So let me talk about that. So I did some research, and yes, Tilray was up over 300% year to date, and now it's down almost 70% from its high 2 months ago. So you might want to look into possibly buying some Tilray. And then you had Canopy, Aurora, Kronos, all nearly 200% from about a year ago and down almost 50%. So maybe some of those companies you can look into. For those of you who don't know, Canopy Growth got a $5 billion investment from Constellations, who owns Corona and Modelo and some others. So I just wanted to name a few of those. So would now maybe be a good time to buy, or kind of what you're saying is when they come out, you know, everybody's excited, they buy a lot, they drop, and maybe that's, you know, a good time to buy.
I can't you know, recommend any individual stocks on a webcast like this.
Sure.
It's, you know, something I have to do one-on-one with clients.
Sure.
But I think the point being is looking, all of those stocks you named are on, you know, large exchanges, but then also looking for where the large money is going. So when large companies, established, well-branded companies start to make investments in some of these cannabis stocks, you know, if they're willing to invest $5 billion, my bet would be there's not many people listening to this webcast that have $5 billion to invest. So, you know, investing your money behind that and getting it at comparable prices to what that company paid, you know, could be a smart strategy.
Very good. That is smart. I know that I've gotten all excited and wanted to buy right at the time, and it just, yeah. So, so you spoke a little bit about legalization in Canada.
Yeah. Right.
So many companies are doing that. And again, you use the saying, buy the rumor, sell the news, which is very, very interesting.
Yeah. And I expect, you know, there probably will be some of that once it seems inevitable, right? This ball is rolling in the U.S. So, you know, in the next few years, or maybe even shorter, as those conversations start to happen of what if we do get federal legalization or something like that, you know, I think the same principles may play out in buy the rumor, sell the news. But, you know, I'm guessing on that.
Well, something very interesting happened here in Colorado. There was a bill ran last session that passed the House and the Senate about allowing publicly traded companies in Colorado. Because when Colorado started, they wanted local money only, which made sense, because if you had money from outside the state, you couldn't go to the feds to help you
Right.
because it's federally illegal. So anyway, the bill ran. Governor Hickenlooper, who I'm not a fan of at all, did not sign it. Now we have a new governor,
Sure.
Jared Polis, and Jared Polis is going to go back and fix that, which means great things. Hopefully we will get more investment inside of Colorado, which we need. And we do have some companies that are located here like General Cannabis that are going to be really excited about that. So there is some movement, and obviously with that comes regulation. And of course, if that regulation was there when I did this, it would have been a whole different ballgame. So we need that regulation. So finding higher quality investments.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So for most clients that I deal with, and I think most of the investing public, it's really hard to invest in this space because it is so volatile. Most people, if they buy a position and it drops by 5 or 10 or even 20% in a short period of time, they can't handle that amount of risk. It really, it makes them to make bad decisions, irrational decisions, to sell it lower. When nothing's changed with the company, maybe, but it's just the price is down. So a way to invest in this sector is to try and find higher quality ways to do it. We've talked already kind of extensively about looking at the exchanges, look for stocks that are trading on larger exchanges. Some of the other ways that we mentioned, looking for large companies, mergers, acquisitions, or institutional money that are flowing to some of these names. Those kind of have been vetted, so to speak, by that big money. The other thing to do is to use like a basket of stocks through things like mutual funds or ETFs. And there are ETFs that exist in the marijuana space. An ETF is a electronically traded fund. So it's instead of buying one stock, you could buy 40 in one product.
Got it.
And that spreads your risk. So,
Interesting.
If you're looking at ways to get in the space, but to spread your risk, that might be an interesting way. And it's a Google search. You can find those types of investments out there.
I had no idea about that. And that definitely, I feel like makes a lot of sense for this industry.
Right.
Because then it can balance out.
It's going to be really hard to pick who the one winner is going to be today, because there's just so many people. So if you can get a little bit in a lot of the different horses, so to speak, in the race,
yeah,
a little bit on each one, that might be a smarter way to play.
Yeah, definitely. So talking about institutional money, have you seen any of that enter the space yet? Are there rumblings? Goldman Sachs and some of the bigger ones. Have you heard anything?
I think there's still a lot. I mean, yes, there's some large money flowing. I can't say in particular where that's going, but there's definitely a lot of interest across the industry. Same thing is happening, like we talked about in that crypto space. So a lot of the big investment banks are trying to figure out how can they be in this space? How can they open up access to that? It's still really early days, and because of the federal law, because it's still illegal federally, the banks, it's hard. We were hearing horror stories in Denver a few years ago, and I don't know if it's still happening. You could probably speak to this, but there was, they weren't able to put their money in the bank, some of these companies, because of the federal restrictions. So you had to hire security guards and giant safes and all these, it's just a lot of that still in the Wild West. When it comes to these large investment banks, they're going to be very cautious. They don't want to more issues than they've already had in the past.
Sure. And then you still see some of companies staying out of it because they're worried about their current clients, and the stigma still attached to that. Yeah, Colorado, we paved the way. There's no doubt about it. Unfortunately, I feel like we're sliding backwards. But yeah, you had to hire staff just to count money, just to count cash and to pay vendors. but of course you paid the state of Colorado and they put the money in the bank. Isn't that interesting?
Right.
So it's
Double
slowly
standard.
turning, what?
Yeah, kind of a double standard there.
Absolutely. It's, you know, it's slowly turning over. Of course, I will never use Wells Fargo. They have absolutely been horrible. And they have pulled, if they found out you were a cannabis account, they pulled all your personal, any other business. So I hope everybody out there listening does not use Wells Fargo anymore, because they have not done us any favors. So what do you think will happen the second federal legalization goes? Is this going to make it so much easier for, you know, for financial advisors like yourself? What does kind of that look like, do you think?
Well, as the industry expands, as there's you know, more companies available, that makes it easier for us to spread risk. But also we start to see, you know, what do these look like as far as investments? So just because they're investing in that space, or a company has to do with cannabis, doesn't mean it's going to be a profitable investment, right? So some of these companies are trading at ridiculous valuations, and you got to be cautious with that. And it also depends on what type of business. There's a lot of different businesses that will come out of this. So are they just a grower and it's a commodity? Because that's not a great business to be in. And certainly as
100%.
more and more cannabis is being produced, you know, it's supply and demand. So as we expect the price of, you know, of marijuana to drop as a plant, right? But then there's other ways to play it. So, you know, you selling an experience? Are you selling a product around that, or certain brands? So it'll be really interesting how it shakes out. But there's a lot of movement from now till then.
Right.
But I think it's going to be that same thing, that it's not just going to be there. Obviously, hopefully one day will be, you know, okay, today's the federal day like we just had in Canada. But I think up until that, right, that speculation, that rumor of it happening, that's when there can maybe be some opportunity. And maybe the after of that, after it actually is fact, reality,
right.
Maybe, you know, there's some reassessment. The mania might die off a little bit there.
And you can also look at, right, their assets. Do they have real estate? You know, in the very beginning, obviously in Colorado, you were searching for either buying the building yourself, or finding a pro marijuana landlord. Because, you know, in the beginning, they were looking at old buildings that they had to basically overhaul and spend millions. And some of them, you know, got kicked out because the landlord, and they had that to fall back on. So I think a lot of it is assets. But like you said, with cultivation, does that company only cultivate? Wouldn't count on that, because right now, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, I mean, the prices have plummeted.
Right.
And companies that were at the top of the game are now closing down. So I think you're right about that. What about vertically integrated? You know, where they're growing, they're processing, they're selling through a dispensary. Do you think that's a safer bet, or if you could even comment on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, any business, it doesn't have to just do with cannabis. Sorry.
That's okay.
The camera kept cutting off. So, I mean,
All right.
any business, you know, that's any investment, if you have multiple streams of revenue, that's obviously a safer business. Also, looking into higher margin areas in your business. So, you know, I think the smart companies right now are looking at, where can we maintain margins? If we're not going to have any margins whatsoever on the actual marijuana or the cannabis production as a commodity, where can we drive profit? And that might be through smoking devices, or that might be through, you know, edibles, or, you know, I think the industry is going to have to figure that out. Where can we drive the most value, and therefore actually turn a profit? Because right now these companies are trading at huge premiums, and they're not really, they're still losing money, most of them. So
Sure.
one day, the promise of an investment is that one day, if you're going to pay a high premium, that one day that company is going to be very profitable to you as a shareholder. So, looking at where there could be high profit margin areas is a smart place for an investor to be looking at.
Yeah, and actually cannabis, like you talk about get rich quick.
Yeah.
So many people, oh, I want to get in a year or two and, be a millionaire and cash out. Well, that's not happening.
Well, it is. I mean, if you're lucky.
Well, yeah, if you're lucky, but really, I feel cannabis is a long-term play.
Yeah.
Investors are investing when, like you said, they're not turning profits yet. So, it's really a future play for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, this is very interesting. Considering one-off investments, that you say if you can stomach the volatility. I didn't even think of this, but talk about that.
Right. So if a lot of the direct cannabis investments, the ones that have cannabis in their name or directly in that space, they're very volatile. They can move 5-10% in a day. And for some people, that is just way too much movement in either direction. So one thing to do is to look at one-off investments that could be a play in that space. So some examples would be alcohol and tobacco companies. We've already seen some of the alcohol companies get involved, and we've heard rumblings of some of the large tobacco companies getting involved. And think about how easy it would be for them to flick a switch and to move from tobacco to cannabis. So there could be some opportunity in there, and those tend to be much more established. Depending on your stance, how you feel about tobacco companies, you have to weigh that as well. But that could be a way to get invested in the area for some potential. Also agricultural companies, so companies like fertilizer companies or companies that are helping make better margins for these companies that are growing. One that's an interesting one would be like snack companies. So
yep.
all the future people with the munchies, they might see an uptick of sales. And another one that I find really interesting is electric utility companies that's
very smart. Yeah. Yes.
So looking at electric utility companies that currently have grow houses or companies that are in their area, because as you know, cannabis is a very power hungry plant, right? It takes 24 hours of light and refrigeration, and so much of an electric draw that as these grow houses become bigger, they're obviously going to be paying a very large electric bill. So that's an interesting way to play it as well.
Yeah. So would you consider solar then?
Yeah, I mean, if it depends. You got to look at. I think the main thing to look at is where these companies are actually physically located, right? Where is that power actually being pulled from? And if the source has solar, is providing that power through solar, then yeah, absolutely, you could be thinking. Yeah. But if they don't, if it's if they're still burning coal or whatever it is, it kind of is what it is. You can't really. But so I wouldn't just bet on solar. You have to do your homework and see, where are these warehouses located, and therefore who might be servicing them from an electric needs standpoint.
Now, I may be totally off base, but speaking of real estate, what about REITs?
Yeah, so REITs could be an interesting space. There are REITs that are specific to warehouses.
Right.
And certainly when we were looking back in Denver a few years ago, when all of this, the property values were skyrocketing for warehouse space back then. So to be looking at states that have just legalized or on the cusp, to be looking at REITs that have exposure to those states or that area, but specifically to warehouses. So there's REITs that are in all different types. You have malls,
like malls,
senior housing. So to be, again, do your homework. Make sure that you can't just invest in REITs in general. If you want to have exposure to the space, you want to look for ones that have industrial or warehouse exposure.
I wonder if there'll be specific REITs for cannabis properties.
I can almost guarantee it, but who knows? and
Right.
and
That's
to be honest, you have to be cautious of that. So sometimes we've seen these companies pop up and they try and, we've seen public companies put cannabis or crypto stuff in their name just to get their stock price to go up. So be cautious of anyone saying they're going to be a cannabis REIT. Really look through and make sure that they're really doing that and it's not just a marketing ploy.
right. Well, it's funny that you said snacks.
Yeah.
So I have a funny story about that. I was traveling and I was at a restaurant in Connecticut chatting with this guy, and he was a Nabisco rep. And I'm not sure you know this, but Colorado usually falls on the healthiest state, kind of teeters. So we probably don't have the biggest Nabisco sales here. Let's just say that. He said that in the first quarter of legalization here in 2014, they had record numbers for Nabisco. So I think that is a brilliant idea. All of these ancillary one-off companies, I would never even thought of that. So I think that's such a great idea.
Yeah, for those who can't stand the risk of being in, these are companies that are well established and aren't dependent on cannabis driving their bottom line, but it could be a big benefit to them.
Well, and also you mentioned tobacco, and of course, I'm not a big fan of tobacco, of course, but they're turning over their tobacco farms to hemp farms.
Right.
A lot of them. So that would be something to look into as well. Well, this has been so great. Why don't you kind of summarize, for our viewers out there?
Yes, I think the main thing is to really understand your own personal risk tolerance. Specifically, how much are you willing to or can afford to lose? And I wouldn't be investing in this space with more than that. So, while it might seem great to put your life savings in this and you're going to become a millionaire overnight, in most times it can actually do quite the opposite. So be very careful. Don't chase the hype. So when everybody's getting, crazy about, and there's hype in the industry versus hype in the stocks, right? So I'm talking more about those stocks running up significantly in price. Be patient, because there is a long way from now. And, this is a very long journey, and there is going to be a lot of bumps in the road. So be there, be patient, and be ready to take advantage of those drops. And the opposite is there's going to be some fear in those times. So when you feel that fear of, oh no, is it going away? Is this not really going to happen?
Yeah.
Those tend to be, you got to fight that urge as well and be willing to take the risk then. And I think there's going to be some really massive opportunities in this industry, but nothing's guaranteed. And I think people need to know that there is real risk being involved in this space, but there could be big potential rewards. So be safe, talk to an advisor. If you have any more questions, and they can help you tolerate or figure out what your risk tolerance is. And whether it's worth it for you. Do you really need to be taking that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and to set you up for success. I mean, really, it's just like, I truly believe you need a real estate agent to sell your home. Right. You need a consultant if you want to get into cannabis 100%. Right. And you need a financial advisor that knows what they're talking about. So I'm sure there's people out there that are interested. And if you want to get a hold of Chris, you can email us at cultivate@cannabistech.com, cultivate@cannabis.com. Chris, thanks so much for sharing your knowledge. I really appreciate it. And God, we would love to have you on maybe 6 months to a year and kind of see where all of this is at that time.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Nobody knows. So we'll see where they're at. Thanks, Jennifer.
All right. Thanks, Chris.